So there's some issues where there's too much bipartisanship. Yeah, I said it. There's this myth in mainstream media that bipartisanship is always good. And that's not accurate because it depends about the details. It depends on the specifics. What are both parties agreeing to in D.C.? Usually when they both agree, it's to deregulate Wall Street. It's to continue endless wars. Very rarely do they agree on something that's correct. It actually did happen with us ending support for the genocide in Yemen, but Trump vetoed it at the time. And Biden's unfortunately doing some Weasley middle path bullshit on that now as well. So always beware people who claim bipartisanship is always correct, because it's just not true. Well, now you get a great example of what I'm talking about. So this is from Truth Out, and they say the following. In an apparent response to growing calls for making U.S. aid to the Netanyahu government conditional on Israeli adherence to human rights law, 330 members of the U.S. House of Representatives signed a letter late last month insisting that the $3.8 billion in annual military aid the United States provides Israel remain unconditional. The letter, which was signed by virtually all of the Republicans and over half of the Democrats, was a slap in the face to those who have argued that military aid to Israel, like all recipients of taxpayer-funded weaponry, be conditional on at least some level of compliance with human rights and international law. The lawmakers' overwhelming bipartisan opposition to conditioning aid is not a product of political pressures coming from their constituents. Polls show that barely 1/3 of U.S. voters and barely 1/10 of Democrats oppose such conditions. Rather, it appears to be part of a long-standing tradition going back decades of Congress rejecting the will of constituents in favor of the interests of arms exporters and the Pentagon. Only 18 Democrats, only 18, said we should condition military aid to Israel. So in other words, only give them weapons if they abide by international law and respect human rights. Only 18. It was 125 who said, no, we want to give them unconditional support. $3.8 billion in annual military aid. We want to give it to them no matter what. No matter what? No matter what. So think about that. How will history judge this? First of all, a fair, objective look at the situation, you would describe Israel as an apartheid state. And that might even be too kind to just call it that. Because there's an argument there's ethnic cleansing going on right now. So to say just apartheid is actually might be too kind to them. And you have virtually every single Republican and more than half of the Democrats say, no matter what Israel does, no matter what, we're going to give them the military aid. So what if they lined up children and gunned them all down? According to this, these people would say, I don't care. Give them the military aid, no matter what. They could do apartheid, they could do ethnic cleansing, they could do genocide. I don't care. Our support for them is unconditional. So really what's happening is the politicians are listening to the military-industrial complex and listening to the Israel lobby. That's what's going on. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Some of them might have a genuine ideological agreement with that, but that says a lot about these people now, doesn't it? That says a lot about these politicians. So I never want to hear ever again from anybody that the United States does what it does overseas because we care about freedom, we care about democracy, we care about human rights, we care about justice. We don't care about any of those things, even a little bit. That's the bullshit fake story we tell ourselves. That's the veneer we put on and show the world as if we're really moral people. As we support apartheid and ethnic cleansing and continued human rights violations. Shame on these people. Shame on them. Shame on them. Only 18 say human rights and international law matters. Only 18. And God forbid anybody responds, why are you singling out Israel? All right, let me make this crystal clear. The U.S. should cut off funding to every single human rights violating country and international law violating country. Every single one. Saudi Arabia, done. UAE, done. You name it, whatever it might be, done. I have no interest in putting the profits of Raytheon and Boeing and Honeywell over innocent people, victims of crimes by powerful governments. I have no interest in it. So I'm not at all singling out Israel, and none of the 18 who did the right thing on this are in favor of singling out Israel. But that will be the reaction. People say, just like they say about BDS, oh my God, you want to do boycott, divestment, and sanctions to make Israel abide by international law and give Palestinians their human rights? How could you say that? You're singling out Israel, and it must be anti-Semitic. Oh, is it? Is it anti-Semitic? Is it Islamophobic when I criticize the Saudi government for beheading people in the public squares? That is Islamophobic? Is that what that is? All these bullshit, weaponized identity arguments, complete trash, not mildly convincing. And if you're even mildly convinced by it, you're a fucking idiot. So this shit needs to stop. And again, this is one of those things where history is not going to judge this kindly, not even close. This is not a hard question. Of course, you cut off all weapons to human rights violators, to international law violators. Of course you do that. But see, the problem is this. We're the number one violator in the world. So, we don't want to, we're partners in crime with Israel. Hey, you guys do your fucked up shit, we do our fucked up shit, and we still stick by each other, right? Isn't that great? Isn't that great? That's the way it works. And military-industrial complex keeps making their profits. The Israel lobby keeps influencing politicians massively. And Palestinians are screwed. And so we're not some sort of objective arbiter of peace talks to get some sort of, reasonable conclusion to the conflict. No. We're on a side. And it's obvious. And if the U.S. government couldn't even say this, there's no moral authority on anything.